Face the situation I found myself in. Maybe it was karma. I had cheered so loudly when Josh was about to kiss Luna. Although Josh had struggled throughout the night with the various challenges, I hadn't expected it to come back around to me. Now the bottle decided that I was going to share a moment with Linda. Linda was not someone from my usual group or place in life. She dressed well, but her clothes looked cheap. She lived in a trailer, which seemed unglamorous. It felt wrong to be near her, especially if the talks about her were true. But oddly enough, Linda was nice, perhaps in another circumstance. And here I was, being led by Linda out to the pool area of Josh and Kim's large house. Josh was trying to be helpful, but that was no easy task. Linda, too, was being playful but not too pushy. If anyone had a reason to bother me, it would definitely be her. Linda brought me to a sun lounger. I hesitated but finally sat down, lying back as Linda looked over me. Surprisingly, there was no look of desire but rather one of sympathy. Really? She felt sorry for me? I was the one in an awkward spot. "We don't have to do this. Neither of us will enjoy it if I push you," Linda said softly, sitting at my feet. "No, it's okay. I'll just think about," I began to say. "Josh. Zach? My boyfriend? Or maybe my ex? Who can tell anymore?" I replied, managing a small laugh. I was tough enough to handle this. I glanced at Linda. She seemed calm, which impressed me. "Have you done this before?" I asked, a bit nervous about what was coming next. "I've had my experiences," Linda replied with a little grin, which made me squirm. "But we don't have to. We can just pretend it happened," Linda offered. "Really? You'd let me off the hook like that?" I asked, surprised. Why did Linda have to be so kind? It made everything feel more complicated. "I'm just not that type of person. It's not in my nature," Linda said, looking down at the pool. I studied her. Maybe I had misjudged her. If you liked girls, you would see she was pretty, even if her clothes weren't fancy. I tried to push that thought aside. "Why? I've been pretty rough with you since we met," I questioned. Linda met my gaze with strong, determined eyes. There was a spark of kindness there. She didn't want to hurt anyone, including me. I started to feel guilty, but she didn't answer my question as if she already had. "Here," I said. I ran my fingers through my hair, making it messy. Then I touched my eyeliner and smudged it a little. "I'll at least tell everyone you were great." That was something different, I said, pretending to be myself from earlier. Linda laughed and seemed a bit happier. "See? I'm not that bad." "I guess," Linda replied, though she still seemed unsure. A few quiet moments passed between us. "Maybe we should go inside now. We've been out here long enough." "Wait," I said, coming up with one last idea. I dipped half of the towel into the pool, folded it, squeezed it, and opened it up. If we couldn't do it for real, at least I could make it look like something happened. "You really got me soaked, girl," I joked. Linda laughed again. She looked kind of nice when she smiled. She had small dimples that added to her charm. I pretended to be a girl who had a great time, and no one seemed to suspect anything for a while. The rest of the night turned into a fun little party. Soon Toby was off with Kim, who seemed to like him a lot. It was clear they had a connection. We then tossed Josh into the pool, which was a lot of fun. He thought he was so special, but he needed to cool off. I was also impressed by Linda's strength. She managed to help lift Josh without any trouble. "What if we made the sleeping arrangements a bit more interesting?" I suggested, noticing the party winding down. It was getting late. I was secretly hoping to get a chance with Josh. Kim had been raving about how great he was, and I couldn't help but feel curious. Plus, he was attractive. I imagined getting close to him in a playful way, but I knew he was too nice for anything too wild. Zach had tried to take charge, but it just didn't suit him. He was good-looking and decent at sports, but he always seemed so needy. I had liked him at first, but his overly clingy nature bothered me. Well, things didn't go as I hoped. Josh ended up spending the night with Luna. That was tough for me to accept since I wouldn't be there to join in on their fun. Instead, I was back with Linda. Why did my luck always seem to disappoint? At least she was friendly. "We're roommates," Linda said excitedly. I giggled. I was still a bit nervous around her, but she was charming. "There are bedding sets in the closet if the old ones get wet," Kim joked. I laughed along. I knew nothing like that would happen. It was a bit disappointing. I preferred parties where I could find someone to flirt with and steal away for some fun, but tonight, that wasn't happening. Zach was asleep, Josh was with Luna, and Toby had Kim. I got Linda. I sank down onto the bed with a sigh and stared out the window. "You okay?" Linda asked, sounding kinder than I thought I deserved. She sat on the other side, taking off her jeans and sliding under the blanket. She looked at me, resting on her side. I had to look away to avoid staring at her bright eyes. "I don't know. Sometimes I just feel like I could be better," I said. "How so?" "Don't get me wrong, you can be hard to deal with, but why do you think that?" Linda replied, playfully calling me difficult. It stung, but I knew it was true. I didn't mind being tough. What could anyone really do about it? I stood up and began to take off my tight jeans as well. I heard Linda shift, and when I looked back, she had turned away to give me space. "I think I misjudged you before, but now I'm disappointed I have to share this bed with you," I continued. I knew my words could hurt, but it was honest. "Well, I guess that makes sense," Linda said quietly. My comment had clearly affected her. Hearing that made me feel a bit softer. I usually didn't care about hurting someone, but Linda was too nice for that. As I climbed into bed, I sat there just watching her back as she faced away. I reached out and touched her shoulder. "Listen, I'm sorry. I didn't mean it like that." "It's okay," Linda mumbled, yawning and then rolling onto her back. "I'm just tired and can't think of a good reply." She closed her eyes. "Let's just sleep. We both hoped for something different, but here we are." With her eyes shut, I glanced at her outfit. I remembered she wore a maroon top earlier that revealed a lot, but now it felt different. I started to wonder what the rest of her was like. She felt unlike anyone I'd known, and I was curious. "Here we are," I said again, still sitting and looking at her. After a moment of silence, I decided to speak up. "Can I ask you something?" "No, but go ahead anyway," Linda replied sleepily. "Who did you want to draw?" I asked. I had my own choice in mind, but I could tell she did too. "That's not your business," Linda said, still with her eyes closed. "Oh," I said, feeling a bit defeated. I didn't want to let the silence go on. "So, how did you meet Kim and Josh? You're from Cordington, right?" Linda didn't answer. I could hear her quiet breathing. Had she fallen asleep or was she pretending? I laid down too, tucking my legs under the blanket. At first I tried to sleep, but I couldn't settle down. While everyone else was enjoying themselves, I only had the snacks. Thoughts of Josh's impressive build filled my mind. Toby was with Kim and they were close. I turned over and faced the window. Outside, it was dark and quiet. Linda was breathing loudly and I couldn't hear anyone else from the walls. Was no one else awake? I wondered if I should sneak into the hallway to see if someone was there. The walls in this house were thick. After 30 minutes of trying to sleep, I got up. I figured I could at least grab a glass of water. I didn't want to put on my tight pants again. They were uncomfortable. I decided to wear a simple black outfit instead. Before returning, I glanced in the mirror. I examined myself. I looked good. My blonde hair, bright blue eyes, and confident smile made me feel pretty. I gave myself a little wave and headed back. I returned to the room safely. Looking at Linda, she was still asleep, just like before. My eyes wandered over the blanket. There seemed to be an odd crease in it. I dismissed it as just the way the fabric lay. I got back in bed, hoping to sleep, but it didn't come. I felt restless. Maybe I should have spent more time with Linda earlier. It could have led to something fun, but now she was asleep and I was awake. I rolled over and looked at her. With her eyes closed, it was easier to appreciate her. Even in the low light, Linda was pretty. She had a nice smile, even in her sleep. There was something confident and sweet about her features. I noticed her lips. They had a nice shape that drew my attention. I found myself wondering if she was a good kisser. I felt a little envious of the other girls who had spent more time with her. My gaze drifted down to her chest. Linda had a nice figure. I had noticed before, and now I could see her breathing made it look even better. They appeared real and natural. It was hard to be sure. Maybe I was just feeling restless. I slowly turned over in bed, glancing at Linda sleeping beside me. My mind wandered as I thought about our earlier conversations and the moments we shared, trying to distract myself. My curiosity was starting to get the best of me, but I knew it wasn't right to let it take over. I sighed, trying to calm my thoughts and emotions. Linda was peaceful, her breathing steady. I watched for a while, lost in my own thoughts. The earlier events of the evening replayed in my mind, but I knew I had to let go of the feelings that were bubbling up inside me. Instead, I focused on relaxing and getting some sleep. I shifted in bed, trying to get comfortable, but my mind kept returning to the interactions I'd witnessed between Linda and our other friends. They seemed so confident, so carefree, and I couldn't help but admire that. I wished I could have that same ease, but I knew I had to push those thoughts away for the night. As I lay there, I realized I needed to get my mind off things. I tried to focus on something else, anything that could help me drift off. It was just one of those nights where sleep seemed impossible, no matter how hard I tried. My view of Linda was changing quickly. I had always thought she was strong and confident, but now I found myself admiring her even more. There was something about her presence that just commanded attention, and I couldn't help but be impressed by her. I couldn't stop myself from being curious. My thoughts wandered, but I knew I needed to keep things in perspective. It wasn't right to dwell on these feelings. I took a deep breath and reminded myself to stay grounded, focusing on how we were just friends. Linda stirred slightly in her sleep, and I felt a moment of guilt. I knew I was letting my thoughts run away with me, so I turned away, trying to clear my mind. There was no point in overthinking things, and I needed to get some rest. I glanced at her one last time before closing my eyes, determined to let go of the swirling thoughts. I reminded myself that admiration didn't need to be complicated. I respected Linda for who she was, and that was enough. It was time to get some sleep, and I tried to focus on that, letting the night take its course. I repositioned myself on the bed, feeling the weight of the situation but still unable to pull my thoughts away from what was happening. I couldn't deny the curiosity that kept building inside me, and I knew I was treading on dangerous ground. But it was like something was pulling me in, and I just wanted to see how far I could go. The room was quiet, with only the faint sound of breathing. I tried to keep my movements subtle, cautious not to disturb anything. I inched closer, focusing on the warmth and presence near me. My thoughts were spinning and I knew I had to stop, but it felt impossible to step away. As I got closer, the air around me seemed heavier, and I could feel the tension growing inside. I hesitated for a moment, but the pull of curiosity won again. I was careful, trying to balance the need to explore and the awareness of the line I was crossing. Each small move felt like a step deeper into something I wasn't sure I should be part of, yet I kept going, driven by an impulse I couldn't fully explain. Suddenly, Linda shifted in her sleep, and I froze. My heart raced, and I realized how far things had gone. This had to stop. I backed away slowly, my mind still reeling from everything that had just happened. Linda's voice suddenly broke the silence, catching me completely off guard. "Let me help you with that," she said softly, surprising me as I looked up. I hadn't realized she had woken up, and her calm tone took me by surprise. Before I could react, Linda gently placed her hand on the back of my head, guiding me with a firm but controlled motion. I felt a moment of hesitation but noticed the reassuring look on her face. She wasn't angry or upset, just taking control in a way that felt natural for her. Her strength and confidence were undeniable, and I followed her lead. With a steady rhythm, she guided me, and I could feel the tension building inside. Despite the intensity, there was something oddly comforting in the way she handled everything, as though she knew exactly what she was doing. I focused on staying calm, following her movements. As she continued to lead, I realized how much she appreciated the effort. It wasn't about power or control, but rather a shared moment of trust. I let myself relax into the rhythm, knowing that we both understood where the boundaries were. Linda's calm, guiding presence reassured me as the intensity grew. We moved together, and as the moments passed, the connection between us became clear. There was no need for words, just the quiet understanding of what was happening. The night was peaceful, and I focused on that, letting the tension ease as Linda led the way. Finally, Linda slowed, her strength guiding me through the motions with care, until the moment passed and we both relaxed. I felt a sense of relief and understanding, knowing that we had navigated the situation together with trust and respect. The room was quiet, the tension thick in the air. Linda shifted slightly, and I could feel how close she was to losing control. Her breathing quickened as the moment built between us. and I tried to keep my focus steady. Every movement was calculated, every second pushing us closer to the edge. Suddenly, Linda took control, guiding me with a quiet strength that made it clear who was leading. I could feel the intensity of the moment growing, but there was a sense of trust that allowed me to follow her lead. She held me close, steadying me as we moved together, her gentle yet firm grip ensuring that the situation remained in control. As Linda guided me, the exhaustion began to catch up with me, but I pushed through. I was determined to be present in the moment, not for myself, but for her. This wasn't just about me, it was about a shared connection, something deeper than I could have expected. Each second passed with an intensity I had never felt before. Despite the challenge, I didn't want to stop. There was a drive inside me to continue, to prove something to myself, to her. It wasn't logical, but emotions rarely are. I wanted to show my loyalty, my commitment to making this moment meaningful. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the tension eased. I could feel the weight of the moment pass, and Linda let out a soft sigh of relief. I backed away gently, catching my breath and feeling a mix of exhaustion and accomplishment. We had navigated this together, and that was what mattered most. Linda chuckled softly, a sound that was warm and filled with appreciation. It wasn't mocking, it was kind. I smiled, knowing I had done my best. The connection between us had deepened, and I felt a sense of pride in having shared this experience with her. I lay back, feeling the calm wash over me. Linda's presence remained strong, and I could sense the bond between us growing. In that quiet moment, there was nothing but mutual respect and understanding. We had both given something of ourselves, and that was enough. I could feel the tension in the air as Linda and I shared a quiet moment, her movements slow and deliberate. She seemed to be in control, and I found myself following her lead without question. As she shifted, there was a sense of anticipation building between us, each small motion deepening the connection. Linda's voice was calm but filled with intent. "You're really pushing me," she said, a hint of amusement in her tone. She was testing the waters, making sure I understood the gravity of the moment. I nodded, keeping my focus on her as she moved closer. There was something powerful about the way she carried herself, the way she took her time. It wasn't rushed and it wasn't forceful, just a steady sense of knowing what she wanted. I braced myself, feeling the weight of her presence, waiting for what would come next. Suddenly, Linda's hand met my side, pulling me closer to her. Her grip was firm but not harsh, and I could sense the care behind every move. The room was quiet, save for the sound of our breathing. Linda took a deep breath, and I could feel her resolve solidify. She wasn't rushing anything, but the anticipation grew, filling the room. As she moved, her energy shifted from playful to focused. I could feel her strength as she adjusted, and I couldn't help but feel a mixture of awe and respect for her confidence. There was no need for words as she leaned in, letting the moment speak for itself. Finally, she paused, her hand resting on my side as she looked at me. "Are you ready?" she asked softly, her voice filled with warmth and understanding. I nodded again, feeling a sense of calm wash over me. Linda leaned in closer, and we both understood that this moment was about trust. She held me steady, and together we let the moment pass naturally, allowing the connection to deepen between us. It was quiet, powerful, and shared with a deep sense of respect. Linda smiled at me, and for a moment everything felt calm. Her expression was soft, and I could feel the connection growing between us. "There you are," she said with a light chuckle, her voice full of warmth. Without saying more, she adjusted herself slightly, maintaining steady eye contact with me. Each of her movements was confident, and I couldn't help but notice the care she took. As she moved, the intensity between us increased, but it never felt rushed. Linda was focused, determined, and her gaze never left mine. I was lost in the moment, completely captivated by her presence. Her calm control guided the pace, and I could feel my heart race with every passing second. The connection between us was undeniable, and I couldn't focus on anything else. It was as if the whole world disappeared, leaving just the two of us in that shared moment. "You're amazing," I whispered, overwhelmed by the closeness. Linda responded with a quiet groan, clearly moved by the connection we had. She leaned in closer, her head resting gently on my shoulder, and I wrapped my arms around her, holding her tight. There was a sense of comfort in the closeness, a bond that felt deeper than anything I had expected. Each movement was careful, measured, and full of mutual understanding. As the moment grew, Linda's strength became more evident, but there was still a softness in how she handled everything. I could feel the effort she put into making sure everything stayed balanced, making sure I was comfortable. It was intense, but never overwhelming. Time seemed to blur as we continued, lost in the moment. When it was over, Linda gently pulled away and stood beside me, a calm smile on her face. She looked at me with a kind of appreciation that made me feel safe, like we had shared something important. "Did I miss something?" I asked, noticing how peaceful everything felt. Linda smirked, her eyes twinkling with amusement. "No, you were perfect," she said softly, reassuring me. She then asked, "Do you want to change positions? We can try something different if you'd like." I nodded and shifted onto my stomach without hesitation, trusting her completely. Linda moved closer, positioning herself above me with care. Her movements were deliberate, and she made sure I was comfortable before continuing. I felt completely at ease, knowing that she was always paying attention to how I felt. As the moment continued, I couldn't help but marvel at how gentle yet strong Linda was. Each of her actions was thoughtful, making sure we were both connected and in sync. The experience was intense, but it was the shared understanding and trust that made it so meaningful. In the end, what mattered most was the bond we had built, something that would stay with me long after the moment passed. Linda adjusted her position slightly, taking a deep breath as she moved with deliberate care. I could feel the intensity in the air, and my mind was racing. She paused briefly and asked, "Are you okay?" with concern in her voice, making sure everything was fine. "I'm not sure how much more I can take," I managed to say, feeling overwhelmed. It had been such a powerful experience, and I could barely keep up with the rush of emotions. "Good," Linda responded, her voice filled with focus. She steadied herself and continued with more energy, holding me firmly as she found a comfortable rhythm. Her movements were strong, and I could sense the determination behind each motion. I couldn't help but let out a yell as everything became more intense, the energy between us growing stronger by the second. Linda moved with precision, making sure every moment felt intentional. I was completely lost in the experience, barely able to think of anything else. "This your first time with something like this?" Linda asked between breaths, clearly enjoying the moment. Yes! You're incredible!" I gasped, barely able to form words as the feeling became overwhelming. "You like this?" She grinned, her confidence clear. "Yes, keep going," I responded, trying to match her energy as the intensity built up even more. It felt like nothing I had ever experienced before. Linda kept going, finding just the right way to keep me on edge. I could feel myself reaching my limit, every sensation overwhelming me. Finally, Linda paused and pulled back, leaving me breathless and trying to recover from the intensity of it all. "You're amazing," Linda said softly as she sat down next to me, her hands gently resting on my back. The moment was quiet for a second, as we both took in the experience. "Thank you," I whispered, still catching my breath. She smiled warmly, showing that she was as content as I was. The connection between us was undeniable, and for a few more moments, we simply rested in the quietness of the room. Linda and I were both breathless, caught up in the intensity of the moment. "Stay with me," I murmured, feeling the connection between us. She picked up the pace, moving with purpose and strength. Every motion brought me closer to my breaking point, and soon my body shook as I let out a cry, overwhelmed by the sensation. I could hear Linda breathing heavily, and after a few more powerful motions, she too reached her peak, her body tense for a moment before she relaxed, completely spent. We both stayed still for a while, exhausted and trying to catch our breath. I was worn out, but the bond we had in that moment felt special. When I finally caught my breath, I glanced up at her and smiled. "That was incredible," I said softly, still feeling the afterglow. Linda smiled back, clearly satisfied as well. "Yeah, it really was," she agreed, looking just as exhausted as I felt. We shared a quiet moment before deciding it was time to clean up. "Let's take a shower," Linda said, standing up and offering her hand. I followed her, and we helped each other clean off, taking turns rinsing away the tiredness from the night. We were quiet, comfortable in each other's company, and I couldn't help but feel like things had changed between us. Once we were clean and dried off, we got ready for bed. Linda gave me a playful hug from behind, resting her head on my shoulder. "Sorry if things got a bit intense," she mumbled, clearly ready to sleep. I smiled and shook my head. "No, it was great," I reassured her, feeling a sense of contentment. We curled up together, the warmth of the day fading as sleep overtook us. But a few hours later, I was stirred from sleep by a soft noise and realized Linda was awake again. She moved closer, her energy clearly still strong despite the late hour. "You up for more?" she whispered with a grin. I chuckled, surprised by her enthusiasm, but not surprised at how easy it was to get caught up in the moment again. "I guess so," I mumbled, letting her take the lead. Linda wrapped her arms around me, pulling me close as we shared another quiet moment together. This time it was slow and gentle, the pace much calmer than before. There was something about the tenderness of the moment that made it feel different, but just as special. We moved together with ease, enjoying the connection without rushing. It was peaceful, a perfect way to end the night. Finally, when we both were too tired to continue, we settled down again, ready to get some much-needed rest. As we drifted off to sleep, I couldn't help but feel grateful for the closeness we had shared. Linda moved gently, shifting my position as she turned me onto my back, her focus entirely on me. The intensity in her eyes was clear as she watched my expression change with every motion. She slid back into me effortlessly, her movements steady and controlled. I could feel every moment, but she was careful, making sure I was comfortable. She leaned forward slightly, looking down at me with a smile. "You okay?" she asked, her tone gentle despite the intensity of the moment. I nodded, still feeling overwhelmed by the sensations. "Yeah," I whispered with a sheepish grin, feeling the closeness between us. Linda chuckled softly but kept her focus, her movements picking up pace. There was something comforting in how she moved, never too rushed, but with a steady rhythm that made me feel safe. The connection between us deepened as we moved together, her eyes locked on mine. For a brief moment, we shared a quiet laugh, teasing each other in between breaths. But then Linda picked up the pace again, her focus returning. I could feel my body respond, every movement bringing us closer to the edge. "Just relax," Linda said, her voice filled with warmth as she maintained the steady rhythm. She made sure I was okay, never pushing too far. As things progressed, I could feel the intensity growing. Linda continued to be mindful, watching my reactions, and adjusting her movements to keep everything balanced. After a while, she slowed down, giving me a chance to catch my breath. "How about we take a break?" Linda asked with a grin, her voice lighter now. I nodded, grateful for the chance to rest. She leaned back and we both took a few moments to relax, the air between us now filled with a sense of calm and mutual understanding. After a while, we both cleaned up, sharing a quiet moment of reflection and comfort. Linda smiled softly, giving me a reassuring pat on the back. "That was something," she said with a chuckle, clearly as exhausted as I was. "Yeah, it really was," I replied, still feeling the closeness between us. As we settled back into bed, the night now quieter, we shared one last smile before sleep finally took over, leaving us both content and at peace. At that moment, Linda could have asked anything of me, and I would have done it willingly. "I'm all yours," I said softly, wanting to please her. She motioned for me to adjust my position on the bed, and I quickly moved to follow her direction. Linda positioned herself above me, her expression calm yet focused. I watched her closely, feeling the anticipation build. She moved carefully, making sure I was comfortable as we settled into a rhythm, each motion smooth and deliberate. "You sure know how to follow instructions," Linda teased with a chuckle, her tone light yet playful. I smiled at her, feeling the warmth of the moment between us. Linda kept the pace steady, her movements precise but never too intense. I could hear her breathing softly, matching the gentle flow of the situation. With each motion, I could feel the connection deepening, and we both seemed to lose ourselves in the shared experience. There was no rush, no urgency, just two people enjoying each other's company. After some time, Linda's breathing grew heavier, signaling that the moment was coming to a natural close. "That was something," Linda said, catching her breath as she moved to lie down next to me. I smiled, feeling a sense of calm wash over us both. "Thanks for showing me a different side of you," I replied, curling up beside her. Linda chuckled softly, clearly tired but content. "And thank you for being such a good sport." We both settled into a comfortable silence, and soon enough, sleep took over, leaving us to rest after the long night. The next day came quietly, and we both reflected on how much things had shifted between us. It was clear that our connection had grown, and we were both grateful for the openness and trust that had formed between us. It was a relief to finally let go of the day's tension and find some peace. I carefully snuck past my sleeping husband and his sister, who were curled up together, her arm draped over him as they slept. They looked so peaceful, and I couldn't help but smile at the sight. With a quiet giggle, I left the room and made my way to Toby's room. "You know, I haven't been in this room since you moved in," I said as I adjusted the pillow, getting ready to settle down for the night. "You're welcome any time," Toby replied, sounding a bit flirty. "Maybe," I teased back. "But no funny business tonight. I'm tired, and you've already had your fun." I yawned to emphasize my point. Toby looked a little disappointed but quickly accepted it. He lay down on the bed, leaving plenty of space between us since the bed was large enough for both. "Well, maybe you can hold me a little," I said after a moment, softening up. "But keep your hands to yourself." Toby's face brightened at that. Without needing more encouragement, he scooted closer and wrapped an arm around me. Before tonight, we had barely shared any closeness. Now, after everything, he was holding me, and I was surprisingly comfortable with it. As we lay there, I felt him shift slightly behind me. His body was warm, and though I could tell he was trying to be respectful, there was an undeniable closeness between us. I squirmed a little, and I could sense his reaction, but Toby stayed calm. His hand rested gently on my side, his touch light and careful. For a moment I wondered why this felt so easy. Maybe it was the comfort of the night, or maybe just how gentle he was being. I shifted again, moving closer to him, and could feel the warmth of his body against mine. Toby, sensing the closeness, slowly moved his hand up from my side to rest on my belly, rubbing gently in soft motions. He was careful, not pushing any boundaries, and I appreciated that. He didn't cross any lines, and for that I found myself relaxing even more. As a way to show my trust, I guided his hand upward, letting him place it gently on my chest. He responded quietly, his touch still soft as he carefully held me. It wasn't about anything more than simple closeness, and for the moment, that was enough for both of us. Toby seemed tense, but I shifted slightly so we could both be more comfortable. I adjusted myself so he could hold me better, resting his arm around me. The closeness between us grew as we lay there in silence, enjoying each other's company. Toby sighed softly as we settled in, and I felt him relax beside me. It was clear that the events of the day had left us both a bit overwhelmed, and now we were just enjoying a quiet moment together. I could sense that Toby was fighting some urges, but he respected the boundaries I had set earlier, which made me trust him more. His hand rested lightly on my side, and for a moment I thought he might push things further, but he didn't. Instead, he gently held me, and we both began to drift off into sleep. The alcohol from earlier had made me sleepy, and though it wasn't my bed, it was still a moment of peace after a long day. After some time, I woke up slightly, feeling Toby's presence close by. He had shifted in the bed but hadn't crossed any lines. I smiled to myself, glad that he had respected my wishes. As I drifted back into sleep, I could sense how much Toby cared about me. It was comforting, and despite the tension earlier, we both ended the night in a calm, shared understanding. The next morning, I woke up feeling refreshed, even though it hadn't been the best night's sleep. I was glad we had gotten through the evening without any drama, and as we prepared to start a new day, I knew that Toby's respect and care for me had deepened our friendship even more. Toby lay beside Kimberly, his thoughts running wild as he struggled with his growing feelings. He couldn't deny how beautiful she looked, peacefully sleeping next to him. But he knew he needed to respect her, no matter how tempted he felt. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself, and reminded himself to stay calm. As time passed, Toby quietly adjusted his position, making sure not to disturb her. He was trying to manage the tension he felt, but the situation wasn't easy for him. Kimberly's presence was a reminder of how much he cared for her, but he also knew that crossing any boundaries was not an option. Toby sat up for a moment, looking down at Kimberly. He admired her features, the way her hair fell across the pillow, her relaxed expression, and the gentle rise and fall of her breathing. There was something calming about just being near her, and he let himself enjoy the moment without pushing things any further. After a while, Toby decided it was best to step away from the bed. He quietly left the room, taking a moment to clear his head and regain his composure. He knew he needed to respect the trust Kimberly had placed in him, and he was determined to keep that trust intact. The feelings he had were strong, but he also knew that real connection came from understanding and respecting each other's boundaries. As he returned to the room, he looked at Kimberly once more, feeling grateful for the friendship they shared. He quietly lay back down, careful not to disturb her, and closed his eyes, letting sleep finally take over. It wasn't about desire or temptation anymore. It was about appreciating the closeness they had, even if it meant just being by her side in that moment. Toby felt the tension building inside him, his thoughts racing as he watched Kimberly peacefully sleeping beside him. The situation was overwhelming, but he tried to stay calm and in control. He shifted slightly, attempting to steady himself without waking her. He knew he needed to be respectful, even though his emotions were running high. As he adjusted his position, Toby nearly lost his balance. Quickly catching himself, he glanced down at Kimberly to see if she had stirred from his clumsy movements. Thankfully, she remained sound asleep, her breathing steady. Toby sat still for a moment, taking in the peacefulness of the room. He realized he was letting his emotions get the best of him, and it was time to step away from the situation. He carefully moved back, not wanting to disturb Kimberly's rest any further. After a few deep breaths, Toby quietly left the room to clear his head. The night had been intense, but he reminded himself of the importance of respecting boundaries. He didn't want to ruin the trust they had built. So he took this moment to regain his composure. Returning to the room, Toby glanced at Kimberly one last time. She was still asleep, and he felt grateful for her presence. He lay down next to her again, this time with a sense of calm and understanding. Toby knew that no matter how strong his feelings were, what mattered most was the respect and care he had for Kimberly. That thought helped him relax as he finally drifted off to sleep, feeling a sense of peace and contentment. It had been an eventful night already, and I found myself lying on my back, eyes closed, trying to relax. The night was still young, but my mind wandered, thinking about what Kimberly might do when she woke up. Would she be annoyed? Or perhaps find it funny? I wasn't sure, but the idea made me chuckle quietly to myself. Kimberly seemed deeply asleep, which was surprising since she always mentioned she preferred her own bed. I glanced over at her, still resting peacefully. A small part of me was tempted to interact with her, but I knew I needed to respect her space. The night had already been intense enough. Despite the thoughts running through my head, I stayed where I was, letting the quiet of the room settle around us. Kimberly didn't stir much, and I realized I needed to control my emotions. I shuffled slightly to get more comfortable and took a deep breath, trying to calm down. Eventually, I gave in to the calm of the room and decided it was best to let the night wind down. I turned to face away from Kimberly, grateful for the closeness we shared, but knowing that was enough for now. The silence grew as the night continued, and I felt myself finally drifting off to sleep, content with where things stood. I woke up feeling the bed gently shifting, like something was causing it to rock back and forth. I hadn't been sleeping well, and now it was even harder to stay asleep. Confused, I reached out and felt something warm next to me. It was Toby, and as I opened my eyes, I realized he was lying beside me, staring directly at me. Toby seemed focused, and I quickly noticed what was going on. He was caught up in his own thoughts, lost in the moment. I'd kicked off my blanket so my legs and stomach were visible, though thankfully my t-shirt still covered the rest. He clearly hadn't expected me to wake up and see him. I shifted slightly, moving my knee across my leg and adjusting my posture, making it clear that I was now fully awake. Toby froze for a second, his eyes locking onto mine, but instead of reacting with shock or embarrassment, I just gave him a small smile, letting him know it was okay. "Like what you see?" I asked, my voice still heavy with sleep. Toby nodded, relaxing a bit when he saw I wasn't upset. He continued what he was doing, though more cautiously now. "You're really pretty," he whispered, trying to break the silence between us. I smirked a little, resting my head on my elbow as I looked at him. "I've been told that before," I said, my tone playful but calm. I glanced down at him again, noticing his nervousness. "Need any help with that?" I asked. I wasn't bothered by the situation and figured there was no harm in offering to help, especially since he clearly wasn't trying to overstep. Toby's eyes widened in surprise, and he nodded eagerly. Instead of just jumping in, I rolled out of bed, making my way around to his side. He looked at me curiously as I pointed to the edge of the bed. "Scoot over here," I said softly. Toby quickly obeyed, sitting on the edge of the bed, feet on the floor and leaning back slightly. He seemed almost shy, but there was no denying the awkwardness of the moment. I knelt down in front of him, keeping things casual and light. I reached out and gently took over, guiding him through the moment in a way that didn't cross any boundaries. There was no rush, no pressure, just a sense of quiet understanding between us as I tried to help him relax. It was a strange moment, but one that passed with an unspoken agreement to keep things respectful and simple. After a while, the room quieted and the tension slowly eased, leaving us both in a more comfortable space than before. Toby shifted closer, clearly caught up in the moment, and I could feel the tension between us. I knew I had to be careful, but the situation was becoming more than a little awkward. His movements were subtle, but it was clear he wasn't thinking straight. I took a deep breath and decided to take control of the situation, gently pushing him back. This wasn't where things needed to go, and I wanted to make sure we kept our boundaries. I shifted away from him slightly, creating some space between us, and tried to lighten the mood. "All right, that's enough," I said softly, giving him a small, reassuring smile. Toby blinked, snapping out of his daze, and nodded. He looked embarrassed, realizing he had gone too far. I could see he was trying to collect himself, and I appreciated that he understood the moment had to stop. After a moment of silence, we both took a breath, and the atmosphere began to relax. "Let's get back to normal," I added, standing up and heading to the bathroom to freshen up. Once I returned, everything felt more comfortable. The tension had passed, and Toby seemed to have calmed down. We both knew there was a line that didn't need to be crossed, and I was grateful we were able to step back from the situation before it escalated. Later that day, Toby and I drove to the local boxing gym. He had taken an interest in getting fit, and I had suggested boxing as a fun way to stay active. During the drive, he asked about some of my amateur boxing experiences, and we chatted easily about fitness routines and workouts. It was a lighthearted conversation, a welcome change from the earlier tension, and I was glad to see Toby more relaxed and focused on something productive. We arrived at the gym, ready to get in a good workout. Boxing, as I had explained to him, wasn't just about fighting, it was about building endurance, strength, and discipline. Toby seemed eager to give it a try, and I was happy to guide him through the basics. It felt good to be back on track, focused on something healthy and constructive. "They only have a couple of active fighters," I mentioned, steering the conversation back on track. Toby seemed lost in thought, and I noticed his hesitance. "What's on your mind, buddy?" I asked, glancing over to let him know I was listening. "Have you ever been unfit?" he asked shyly. "What?" I replied, though I knew what he meant. I just needed a second to gather my thoughts. Toby continued, "Girls always look at you. Amanda even mentioned that some girls think of you when they're with their guys." His voice was quiet, as if he was unsure how to bring it up. "Amanda's been talking, huh? When was this?" I chuckled. "After the first party. You and Kimberly had already gone to bed," Toby muttered. "Well, to answer your question, no. I've always been active. I work out a lot and try to eat well. You know how much I love Kim's enchiladas, right? But yeah, I've always kept in shape. I even told you about my Olympic trials before the pandemic hit," I explained. "So how do you do it?" Toby asked. I smirked. "You mean how to get big muscles and ripped arms?" I teased, but he nodded earnestly. I knew Toby had been trying to get in shape, and I had a feeling part of it was for Kimberly. I also knew about their flirty behavior Kim had told me. It was unusual, but we were honest with each other, and I was okay with it as long as it stayed casual. "Does Kimberly work out too, besides swimming?" Toby asked, clearly curious. You don't get an amazing figure like hers without some effort, I said, playfully nudging his shoulder. She does her lunges and squats. As for you, stick with swimming and boxing a couple of times a week and try to cut down on the junk food. The real key is consistency. We pulled up to the gym. Here we are. Just watch out Freya doesn't go easy on beginners, I joked. A week passed without much happening. It wasn't until a regular evening that something changed. Kim and I were in bed, winding down for the night. I was reading a book, and Kim was on her phone, doing her usual late-night scrolling. A few hours later, I woke up and noticed Kim wasn't beside me. I figured she had gone to get some water, so I rolled over and went back to sleep. But not long after, I was woken by the sound of footsteps approaching the bedroom. The door burst open and Kim hurried in. "Good, you're awake," she whispered, sounding breathless. Before I could even respond, Kim practically threw herself at me. I reached out, thinking she wanted a kiss, but she seemed to have something else on her mind. She was focused, moving quickly and catching me off guard. There was an intensity in her actions that I hadn't seen before, and I was surprised by how determined she seemed. I tried to meet her halfway, wrapping my arms around her and holding her close, but something felt off. "Kiss me," I asked, confused by her hesitation. "No, I can't," she whispered, avoiding my eyes as she continued. Something was different, and I couldn't quite figure out what was going on. "Not yet," Kim whispered, her voice strained. With a grunt, I tightened my grip around her and stood up, lifting her off the bed. I carried her toward the wall, holding her securely as I leaned her against it. She let out a surprised gasp, and I could see the look of both excitement and challenge in her eyes. Kim loved when I showed off my strength like this. With her back against the wall, I leaned in and kissed her deeply. But something felt different. There was a hesitation in her kiss, and her breath tasted unusual. My mind raced, and I suddenly understood where she had been before coming home. Kim hesitated for a moment, then kissed me back with renewed energy, her actions almost as if to cover up the hesitation. "You were out helping our tenant again tonight?" I asked quietly, pulling back slightly, watching her expression closely. "You could say that," Kim replied, her voice breathless. I didn't push further. Instead, I moved us back to the bed, and the intensity between us remained high, but something in the air had shifted. Afterward, Kim fell asleep quickly, but I found myself lying awake, thinking about everything. The next night felt similar, though the energy was different. As I sat reading, I noticed Kim seemed distracted, her phone in her hand typing quickly. I raised an eyebrow as I caught a glimpse of her subtle movements. "Want to share with the class?" I teased, noticing that Kim was unusually focused on whatever she was doing. She didn't seem surprised or even flustered. "Just texting a bit with Toby," she said casually. I couldn't help but smirk. "Texting? Or something more like sexting?" I asked. Kim nodded as if it was the most natural thing in the world. "Yeah," she responded, almost dismissively, not taking her eyes off her phone. My curiosity grew. "Was that what happened last night?" I asked, my tone more serious. Kim nodded again, still focused on her phone. "So, a little goodnight message? Did you head down to see him last night?" I asked, half joking, but with an underlying suspicion. "Hell yeah," Kim said, biting her lip lightly, her eyes closing as if recalling the memory. Her phone pinged again, and her attention returned to the screen. A few moments passed in silence before Kim looked up, a smirk on her face. "Think you could help me out while I text? It'll let me type with both hands." I looked at her in surprise, unsure how to respond to her boldness. She just smiled, clearly enjoying the moment. "You better believe it," she added playfully. I laughed softly, shaking my head. "So that's where you were last night? Down at Toby's?" Kim didn't miss a beat. "He asked if I could come down and help him like before," she said, her tone teasing but matter-of-fact. "I told him no at first, that I was tired and couldn't help him every time," Kim said, sounding frustrated. "But you went down there anyway?" I asked, curious about why she changed her mind. "I guess," she muttered, clearly not interested in explaining further. "Are you going to help me out or not?" Ignoring her question, I pressed further. "How did it happen?" With an eye roll, she answered, "Fine. I sat on his knees and, well, I helped him out. Do you really need the details?" She was growing impatient, her hand moving down to distract me. When I got to his room, he was already waiting, just kind of idly. You know, when he saw me, he probably expected me to take over. And I did. Same as usual. Nothing more. He finished, like always. Did you taste it? I asked, still trying to get more from her. She hesitated, then admitted, yes, I did. It wasn't bad, actually. I let out a deep sigh, but wasn't ready to let go of the conversation just yet. What did he text you just now? Kim looked annoyed, but answered anyway. He asked if I could come down again, said he needed help, and then he sent a picture. And what did you say? I asked, my curiosity still piqued. I haven't replied yet, she said, focusing on me, trying to shift the conversation back. Do it. Go help him again, I said, surprised by my own words. Something about the idea just sparked something inside me, though I didn't fully understand why. No way. Can you just focus on me for once? I really need you right now, she shot back, clearly frustrated. Let Toby do it, I blurted out, the words escaping before I could think them through. I wasn't sure if I meant it, but I wasn't taking it back. Kim looked at me, trying to figure out if I was serious. I could have taken it back, but I didn't. I just watched her, waiting. She raised an eyebrow, still scanning my face. I'll go help him out, but when I get back, you better be ready. But no way am I letting him do anything else. That's your job, she said with a small laugh, amused at the idea. She slipped out of bed, grabbed one of my shirts, and put on some slippers. As she stood in the doorway, she asked, Josh? Yeah? I replied. How much should I help him? She asked, carefully testing the boundaries. I paused, trying to gather my thoughts. On one hand, I didn't mind what had been happening so far, but the idea of things going further made me uneasy. Just keep it the same as before. If you feel like it's too much, just stop, I said, not wanting to make it too complicated. Kim winked playfully and walked out into the hallway. I glanced at her side of the bed and noticed she had forgotten her panties, or maybe she left them on purpose. Was it a sign for me? A reminder of what she was doing downstairs? But the most interesting thing she left behind was her phone. That was definitely on purpose. I picked up Kim's phone and was immediately met with a picture Toby's message from earlier in the night. It was a photo of him, and I quickly swiped it away, not wanting to dwell on it. I scrolled through their messages from the evening. 10:47. Toby. Can you help me out again? 10:48. Kim. I can't keep doing this. I'm married. I'm about to sleep. Good night. 10:48. Toby. You said you would. I sleep so well when you help me. 10:49. Kim. I'm still married, and I'm your landlord. 10:51. Toby. I can return the favor. I couldn't help but think, this guy is getting bold. There was a pause in the conversation, but then Kim responded. 11:09. Kim. No, that can't happen. That's too far. 11:09. Toby. What took you so long? 11:10. Kim. Nothing. Then he sent the picture. I wondered if Toby could sense that Kim was intrigued by his persistence. 11:10. Toby. Let me help. 11:12. Kim. No, we can't. 11:12. Kim. I'll help you, but don't even think about anything else. That was the last message. I glanced at the clock. Kim had been downstairs for about 10 minutes. The conversation had already made me uneasy, but I felt like I needed to know more. Flashback to the night before Kim was restless, her thoughts turning over and over. It had been a while since Toby had asked for her help, and for some reason, she wondered why. Didn't young guys usually need release more often? Maybe he had found something or someone else to distract him, but deep down, Kim was curious. She liked the attention Toby gave her. Maybe I'll just check on him, she thought, giving in to her curiosity. After all, as a landlord, it wasn't unusual to check on tenants, right? You sleeping all right down there? She texted him. A few minutes passed, and she glanced over at Josh, who was engrossed in his book. Down there? Toby replied. Should you be texting me? Why not? Kim answered casually. Because of what we did. Isn't Josh right there? Kim felt her heart race a little. Toby's next message came quickly. You want me to help you out, don't you? Is Josh asleep? Kim's heart skipped a beat. Where did he get the nerve to say something like that? She wondered if Toby was doing something right now as they texted. I know you want to, Toby messaged again after Kim didn't respond right away. Are you doing something now? She finally asked. Yes, came Toby's immediate reply. Kim groaned softly, feeling a strange warmth spread through her. It felt wrong, but it was clear that Toby was thinking about her. Send me a picture of you, Toby wrote. It wasn't a question. Kim hesitated for a moment, then bit her lip and sent him a quick selfie with the caption, "No makeup, sorry." Why did she apologize? We could do it together, like last time, Toby suggested. Minutes passed in silence after that as Kim tried to decide what to do next. I sat there, phone in hand, processing what I'd just read. The messages painted a picture that made me uneasy, but I still wasn't sure what I was feeling. Toby texted, "Is Josh asleep?" Without hesitation, Kim replied, "I'll be down in a minute." I quickly got out of bed, curious about what was happening and wanting to see for myself rather than just hearing about it later. I made my way downstairs, moving quietly through the hallway. To my surprise, Toby's door was slightly open, unusual for Kim, who was usually strict about closing doors. Maybe she anticipated something like this. I approached the door cautiously, and as I peeked inside, the scene unfolded before me. Bathed in the soft moonlight, I could see Kim's bare back, her figure illuminated just enough to capture the moment. She was straddling Toby, her movements slow and steady. His large hands rested on her waist, guiding her gently. They seemed completely in sync, moving together with purpose. But were they really? I felt my heart race as I watched. Kim's subtle movements and the dim light made it almost surreal. She was riding Toby, that much was clear. I couldn't see everything clearly, the blanket covered most of their lower bodies, but the sounds of their quiet pleasure and the way they moved told me everything. Kim's body swayed gracefully, her hips moving in a smooth rhythm. Her soft moans filled the room, growing more intense with each passing moment. Kim suddenly arched her back, throwing her head back as a deep, raw sound escaped her. It was unmistakable she had reached her peak. She continued to move, her fingers gripping her hair as the moment stretched on, while Toby responded with deep, steady motions of his own. I could tell he was following closely behind her, his whole body tensing up. His hands traveled up her sides, finally resting on her back as they both seemed to reach the end of their moment together. The sight left me conflicted. Part of me was captivated by the intimacy of what I had just witnessed, while another part felt uneasy. Was this what Kim thought I meant when I said, "Do what you've done before"? Had she taken it as permission to go further? Kim collapsed onto Toby, her body resting against his. The blanket shifted slightly, and I noticed she was wearing a thong, a rare choice for her. She'd always said she didn't like wearing them. Was it for Toby? The thought crossed my mind as I stood frozen, unsure of how to feel. I heard them whispering softly to each other, their voices too low for me to make out the words. Then I heard a quiet sound, and Kim began to roll off. Realizing I was out of time, I rushed back upstairs. Moments later, Kim walked into our bedroom. "What happened?" I asked casually, acting as though I hadn't seen a thing. Watching my wife in that situation had stirred emotions I hadn't expected, part excitement, part uncertainty. While the whole thing was incredibly intense, I wasn't sure how I felt about them crossing this line. It was further than I had imagined, and yet Kim had seemed so caught up in it, and that left me wondering where things would go from here. Kim had been having fun lately. "Just like last night," she said with a mischievous smile, bouncing on the bed. "What do you mean?" I asked, propping myself up on my elbows. "Oh, I just gave him some support," she whispered playfully, gently pushing me back as she got comfortable. "Are you really going to tell me, or are you just teasing?" I asked, curious about what she would say. "Hey, if we're both a little silly, what's wrong with that?" I joked, knowing how much she liked to share stories about her friends. "All right then, I sat with him," Kim said, getting ready to tell me more. "Then I enjoyed being close to him," she continued. "I took my time, she added, telling me how she loved that feeling. "Wait, did you actually go that far?" I asked, surprised at how bold she seemed. "Not exactly. I played it safe. I didn't want to go too far," she said with a laugh. "I just liked the excitement of being close." "Isn't that pushing things a bit?" I asked, still unsure. "Do you really think so?" Kim asked, looking a little let down by my question. It feels a bit much, I guess, I replied, but it does sound like you had a good time. Her face lit up at my words. I enjoyed it. Sorry, but it felt really nice. The thrill of it all was exciting, she confessed, describing how she felt happy and alive. As she told her story, her enthusiasm grew. She was so into it. Her excitement made the moment even more intense for both of us. There was a spark between us, a sign her experiences with Toby had brought her an adventure. Once she finished her tale, we both relaxed. I rolled over and we lay there, catching our breath. And after? I asked, curious about how it ended. I gave him a quick kiss on the forehead and thanked him, she said with a smile. That's sweet, Kim, I replied softly. So you think it's all right? She asked, a bit worried. Absolutely. It sounds fun, as long as we keep things close to what we have now, I reassured her. It seemed like it became a regular thing that Kim was hanging out with Toby. Not exactly what I had in mind, but it seemed to bring her happiness. Each night, she would go to him, enjoying their playful times together. One night, Kim would come back to our bed just as she promised, and we would end up together, with her sometimes sharing details about what had happened downstairs with Toby. She occasionally mentioned things about how much bigger Toby was than me, not to humiliate me, but more out of amazement, though I couldn't deny that it made me feel a twinge of jealousy. Still, Kim's newfound excitement and energy for our private moments were undeniable. One evening, Kim and I were watching The Bad Batch, a movie with Keanu Reeves and Jason Momoa in our TV room. It was a cozy space behind the kitchen, about 300,350 square feet, perfect for movie nights. We had a large TV in there, and it was our go-to spot for watching films when it was just the two of us. I was settled into the recliner, while Kim was lying on the ill-shaped section of the chaise lounge, with a blanket draped over her lap even though it was a warm May evening. She liked having the blanket for comfort. The movie had just started when we both noticed Toby awkwardly standing in the doorway. Hey, Toby, what's up? I asked, turning slightly to face him. I was wondering if... Toby stammered. Sure thing, grab a seat, I said, motioning for him to join us. Toby hesitated for a moment, then sat down between us on the couch. We all turned back to the movie. It was an intriguing start, no dialogue at first, just an unusual character on screen, and it was strange to see Keanu Reeves in such a different kind of role, especially with that thick mustache. Jason Momoa's character was tough to watch, given the intensity of his scenes. At some point, I glanced over at Kim, expecting her to react to one of the more brutal moments on screen, but instead, I noticed something else. Toby had shifted closer to her, and now the blanket covered both of them. Though they both seemed to be watching the movie, I quickly realized Kim's hand had disappeared under the blanket, moving toward Toby's lap. A noticeable movement in the blanket confirmed what was happening. Really? Right now? I thought, amazed that Kim would do something like that right beside me. How long had this been going on? Probably not long, but long enough. It dawned on me that this must have been what Toby had been trying to ask when he came in. He wasn't just here for the movie, he had come looking for Kim. Toby leaned his head back slightly, a quiet sound escaping his lips as he relaxed into the moment. Kim, still keeping her attention on the movie, was clearly handling more than just the remote under that blanket. You like getting help, don't you, Toby? Kim whispered softly, though loud enough for me to hear. Was this for him? Or was she saying it for my benefit? Yeah, Toby managed to respond, clearly lost in the moment. Kim then shifted, pulling the blanket away, and moved to her knees in front of Toby. It was clear what was happening, but I chose not to react, unsure of how I felt. I watched in silence, my mind racing with mixed emotions. Her wedding ring sparkled along with her hands. This was the first time I had truly seen her in action. Are you ready for this? Can you give me everything? Kim asked playfully. Oh, you're making this too much, Toby groaned. It was interesting watching my wife's small hand move with excitement. I knew that Toby often showed his affection in this way, but I had not seen it happen like this before. I realized that soon she would be covered in what Toby had to give. I had shared moments like that with her, but seeing it unfold before me was extraordinary. With a sudden movement, Toby reached his peak and it splashed across Kim's face. She seemed to enjoy it, smiling as she felt the warmth against her skin. I got up from my chair, picked Kim up, and carried her outside to the pool area. It was closer than our bedroom. I playfully placed her on a bamboo sofa and teased her a bit. "Wow, what's gotten into you?" Kim asked, a bit surprised by my enthusiasm. "I could ask you the same thing." Perhaps Toby felt it was time to take it easy. For the next week, nothing more happened between him and Kim. My big presentation was coming up, and I had to prepare for it on Friday. This meant that Kim took over our business responsibilities. She even organized some broadcasting for an upcoming gaming tournament. She managed to secure some of our merchandise as part of the event, naming N-Trendy as a sponsor. We were proud to provide a great wardrobe. By Friday, we were both exhausted. I completed my presentation and received a B. I had no complaints since I wasn't particularly concerned about my degree. A B in information science was still valuable and could help if our business faced challenges. Luckily, the business was doing well, so we decided to delay our celebration for another weekend. On Saturday, Kim and I went for a long run to release our built-up energy. She looked fantastic in her leggings and pink top, glowing with enthusiasm. We then went our separate ways. I had sparring, football, and later Brazilian jiu-jitsu, while Kim needed to help organize a local gaming event for kids and teens coming up in a few months. Instead of having a big party, we spent the afternoon swimming and planning to grill some sausages and marinated chicken later. I was relaxing and enjoying the sun when a shadow loomed over me. I opened my eyes to see Toby getting ready to dive into the pool. He had really improved his swimming skills. He wasn't the fastest, but he could manage a good number of laps. With a loud splash, he made a big wave. My attention shifted as my amazing wife came over with a bucket of ice and root beer for everyone. Kim was wearing her red swimsuit. It wasn't revealing, but she had a way of making everything look great. As she walked toward us, I noticed the way she moved. It was captivating. "Here, boys," Kim said, placing the bucket between her chair and mine. "Toby, you can grab a drink if you want." Toby nodded and slowly swam toward the far end of the pool. "Do you think you could swim more laps than Toby?" Kim asked with a playful smile. Kim enjoyed showing off, so this was typical. What was different this time was that the person she was comparing me to was Toby. "Poof, no problem. You know I stay active," I said, laughing. To be honest, I was tired. I had worked out all morning with cardio, football, boxing, and Brazilian jiu-jitsu, but I was still confidently up for the challenge. "Want to make it interesting?" Kim asked. I was about to respond, but before I could say anything, Kim turned to Toby. "Toby, do you want to make a bet on who can swim the most laps? You or Josh?" Toby thought for a moment. "A bet?" he asked, bending down to grab a can. He opened it and took a sip, pausing before answering. "Sure." I glanced at Kim, wondering what she was up to. I was feeling worn out, although I believed I was the better swimmer. "What should we bet on?" Kim said with a teasing tone. Ah, I see what she was doing. She hadn't had much fun lately. There was no way I would let her win easily. I would beat Toby. "Pfft, leave the kid out of this," I joked, shaking my head. "How about another sleepover?" Toby suggested. "What's wrong, Josh? Are we afraid to take the challenge?" Kim said, standing up and pulling me along. Okay, so just the most laps, that's it?" I asked. Kim nodded, and so did Toby. "All right, let's do it. Kim, you keep track." I really overestimated my energy. I started strong, thinking this would be quick. Within 10 minutes, I had completed 8 laps, but by the end of the hour, I was nearing 60 laps. I wasn't sure how many laps Toby had done, but he seemed to have lots of energy left. Toby had figured out a way to outlast me, realizing he just needed to maintain a steady pace until I wore myself out. I realized too late that I'd spent too much energy early on, assuming I'd have the stamina to keep going. After struggling through the next half hour, barely managing a few more laps, I had to admit defeat. I climbed out of the pool, exhausted, hoping I'd built enough of a lead. Toby, however, kept his steady pace. He didn't speed up, but he didn't slow down either. It was clear he had been counting my laps, and when he reached 97, he calmly swam to the ladder and climbed out. He didn't even bother with the last 3 laps to make it an even 100. He had already won. While losing to someone I once considered unathletic might have been embarrassing, I didn't care that much in the end. Later, as Kim and I were heading to bed, she gave me an apologetic smile. "See you tomorrow, then?" she asked, trying to lighten the mood. "Just don't do anything I wouldn't do," I joked, accepting the situation. I wasn't thrilled about losing the bet. but I knew things would probably get interesting later on. Kimberly was in the shower a mere few feet away from me, though separated by a door and a shower wall. She had always been diligent about maintaining her routines, and tonight was no different. She was freshening up before bed, and I couldn't help but think about how things had unfolded earlier. She had been so eager to help me before, and I appreciated how considerate she was in her own way. I could have tried to sneak a glimpse of her in the shower, but I held back. I knew better than to push too far, too soon. Instead, I demonstrated patience, something I figured she would appreciate. As I waited, I found myself looking at some images I had saved on my computer. During a time when I had helped Kimberly with a minor computer issue, I had installed a small program that allowed me to access her device. Over the months, I had collected several images of her from her webcam. Most of them were simple shots of her face, some with neutral expressions, but others captured more personal moments expressions that hinted at her emotions. It made me wonder what she looked like in moments of true vulnerability, though I knew that was something I might never see. I clicked through the images, imagining what she might look like in different situations. I knew it was wrong, but I couldn't help myself. Someday, I thought, I might figure out how to win her over completely. It would take time, but I was determined to find a way to show her that I was the one she should choose. Then I heard the shower turn off. Quickly, I shut down my computer and closed everything. If Kimberly ever found out about what I'd been doing, I'd be in serious trouble. There was no room for mistakes. Toby had always been aware that Josh could easily overpower him, especially in physical activities like swimming. Despite beating Josh in their laps challenge, Toby knew that if it came down to strength, Josh would win without much effort. This was partly why Toby wanted to learn boxing and martial arts to build his own skills. But Toby believed that his true advantage lay in his intelligence. He was confident that with time, he could win Kimberly over, showing her that he was the one who truly deserved to be with her. A little while later, Kimberly emerged from the bathroom, her hair wrapped in a towel, wearing a simple gray t-shirt and black shorts. She looked relaxed but still effortlessly attractive. Toby couldn't help but admire how naturally beautiful she was, but he quickly pushed those thoughts aside. "Scoot over," Kimberly said, interrupting his daydream. "I prefer this side." "Which side?" Toby asked, teasing her a little, even though he knew exactly what she meant. She raised an eyebrow and waved her hand, signaling for him to move. Toby obliged, shifting over with a playful smile. He enjoyed moments like this, where they could joke around comfortably. "You tired?" Kimberly asked as she climbed into bed, pulling the blanket over herself. Toby rolled over to face her, their eyes meeting as they lay on their sides. "You want to talk more?" he asked, a little surprised at his own boldness. "Not really," Kimberly chuckled, turning her back to him and reaching out to turn off the light. As the room went dark, Toby hesitated but eventually slipped his hand under the blanket. He gently placed it on her back, testing the waters. Kimberly tensed for a moment but then relaxed, allowing him to leave his hand there. He gave a soft, reassuring squeeze, feeling the warmth of their quiet connection. There was no need for words at that moment, and Toby was grateful she trusted him to share these calm moments together. I held Kimberly gently but firmly, making sure she stayed still as I continued to move forward. My focus was on the moment, staying calm and respectful. I could hear her breathing quicken as she gripped the mattress, a clear sign of the excitement building up inside her. But I made sure to stay in control, slowing down when necessary, and giving her a chance to breathe. Kimberly let out a soft gasp, overwhelmed by the intensity of it all. I stopped, allowing her a moment to rest. As she lay there, I helped her turn over onto her back, gently positioning her. Her chest was rising and falling, and I could tell she was trying to catch her breath. I leaned back for a second, admiring how calm and beautiful she looked. I positioned myself next to her, not wanting to push anything too far. Kimberly's reaction was all I needed to know. She was still processing everything, and I respected her pace. Even though I felt eager, I understood the importance of staying composed and not crossing any boundaries. When she placed a hand on my stomach to stop me, I backed off immediately. I didn't want to do anything that would make her uncomfortable or ruin the trust we had built. "I'm sorry," I said, trying to sound calm and respectful. "Not tonight," she said firmly, but with a sense of warmth in her voice. "Okay," I responded, keeping things light. As we settled back into the moment, I appreciated how much mutual respect mattered. Kimberly looked at me, a bit more relaxed now. I understood that our connection was special, and I didn't want to ruin it by pushing things too far. Maybe she didn't fully realize it yet, or perhaps she didn't want to admit it, being married to her childhood boyfriend and all. But I knew deep down that she was meant to be with me. It had been a close call. I couldn't bring myself to betray Josh, my husband. Things had already gone too far with Toby getting too familiar. Toby clearly wanted more, but that was something I couldn't allow. We had already crossed some lines during my last visit to him, and now things felt even riskier. If I had made the slightest mistake, I would have gone too far, and I wasn't willing to let that happen. Instead, Toby sat between my legs, focused on himself, while I lay there watching. There was something about it knowing that he was so taken with me, enough to make him react this way. Hearing his quiet breaths and the way he watched me sent mixed emotions through my mind. It was an odd situation, but part of me felt curious. He was being careful, keeping his distance, but I could tell that he was close to losing control. The way he moved, the way he acted, it was clear that this moment was building up for him. I watched, but I knew the boundary had to stay where it was. It was then that Toby seemed to lose himself for a moment. He moved a bit closer, his mind clouded. I had to say something, anything, to bring him back to reality. "Don't even think about it, Toby," I said firmly, catching his attention. His eyes widened as he quickly responded, No, I wasn't. I just wanted to know if I could, just like before." I hesitated, knowing what the right answer should have been. 4-0, but... I paused, thinking carefully. "Okay, but just stay outside. I don't want to go too far," I said, my gaze shifting between him and the situation we were in. Toby moved carefully, and I could feel the tension between us rise. The closeness made everything feel intense, but I reminded myself of the limits we had set. As he moved closer, I could sense he was testing the boundaries a bit, but still respecting them. He continued to gently rub against me, and I felt a mix of emotions building up. The sensations were overwhelming, but I knew I had to stop before it went too far. "All right, that's enough. Stop," I said firmly, sitting up. Toby immediately understood. He knew the line we had to keep, and though things had gotten a bit heated, he pulled away without hesitation. I took a breath, realizing how quickly things had escalated. "Don't worry," I said, giving him a reassuring smile. "We'll stick to what's okay." I shifted to a more comfortable position and added, "I'll still help you out, just not the way you might have been hoping." With that, I knelt on the soft floor and looked up at him. It was a familiar setup, one we both understood well. Toby stepped closer, looking down at me with that familiar look of eagerness, though now with a touch more patience. He gently brushed a hand across my face, tucking my hair behind my ear. The small gesture felt more meaningful than before, like there was a deeper connection in the quiet moment. I gave him a quick smile. "Just think about whatever you need to," I whispered, knowing he'd appreciate the suggestion. 4-0 Toby's thumb brushed softly against my lips, almost tickling, but not in an unpleasant way. We locked eyes as his hand lingered there for a moment. I could sense his eagerness, the atmosphere thick with unspoken tension. He moved closer, and I could feel the pressure building in the air between us. "You're getting pretty close," I started to say, but my words were cut short when he moved even closer, brushing against my lips gently. There was a moment of hesitation, and I was caught off guard. I didn't know what to do. My mind felt clouded from everything that had been happening, and I found myself just going along with the situation. I should have stopped things before they went too far, but it felt hard to think clearly in the moment. I knew deep down that this was crossing a line, something that shouldn't happen, but I was overwhelmed by the emotions of the situation. I didn't want to cause any issues or make things worse. The mix of tension and uncertainty was overwhelming, and I was unsure how to navigate it. Toby seemed to sense my hesitation, but there was no turning back now. I realized I needed to step away, take control of the situation, and remind myself of the boundaries we had set. This wasn't what I wanted, and I had to remember what was important. After a moment, I gently pushed him away and stood up. "That's enough, Toby. Let's not go any further." The atmosphere shifted, and Toby, though clearly disappointed, understood that we needed to stop before things went too far. The tension in the room lessened, and I felt more grounded. We had both gotten carried away, but I wasn't going to let it continue down that path. Toby nodded, and I could tell he was trying to process everything that had just happened. It was a strange, complicated situation, and we both knew things couldn't go further without causing problems. We had crossed a boundary, but it was time to step back and set things right. I took a deep breath and smiled lightly, trying to break the awkwardness. "Let's just keep things cool from here, okay?" Toby gave a small, understanding nod. The moment had passed, and we both knew we had to respect the boundaries from now on. I couldn't help but smile as Toby continued. The sensation was overwhelming, and I knew he was getting close by the way his grip tightened and his movements became more urgent. "Oh no!" he gasped. I felt him tense up, and I realized we had crossed a line. The intensity of the moment was too much, but I couldn't let it go any further. It was already too far. Pushing him away just in time, I managed to stop things from escalating, but a moment of hesitation still led to a small slip. His reaction left a lasting impression, and I knew things had to stop there. I quickly composed myself, moving back to reality. What had happened was too much already, and I couldn't let it continue. The boundaries were blurred, but I had to make sure they stayed clear from here on out. Toby's persistence was relentless. His fingers worked carefully yet firmly, causing me to gasp and arch my back. I felt his hands press against my sensitive areas, but I knew I had to stop things before they went any further. "That's enough," I whispered, trying to regain control of the situation. He paused, understanding the boundary had been reached. It was a close call, but things needed to stop there. I sat up, catching my breath and realizing how far we'd come. The next morning, I woke to the sound of peaceful silence, reflecting on everything that had happened. It was time to move forward carefully, leaving behind anything that crossed the line. The morning had a strange calm to it, unlike anything I'd experienced before. As I woke up, there was a sense of satisfaction and ease, like everything had fallen into place. Kimberly, always so attentive, had been by my side, helping me in her own way. I wasn't sure how I felt about the situation, but I couldn't deny the sense of control that seemed to surround me. I sat up slowly, feeling the weight of the moment, and Kimberly looked up at me with a thoughtful expression. Her usual confidence seemed to waver, and for a brief second it felt like she was waiting for something, maybe guidance or clarity. "That was nice," I said, trying to fill the quiet space with words, though the silence carried more meaning than anything I could say. Kimberly smiled softly, a bit of humor in her eyes, but something unspoken lingered between us. We were walking a fine line now, and we both knew it. There were boundaries that had been stretched, and it was hard to tell how far things would go. I shifted on the bed, unsure of what to do next. The sense of power I'd felt earlier was beginning to fade, replaced by a realization that things had changed in ways I couldn't fully understand. As I reached out and gently brushed her hair back, Kimberly watched me closely, her eyes filled with curiosity and perhaps a bit of uncertainty. Whatever path we were on, we had to tread carefully from here on out. I positioned myself, keeping control of the situation as I leaned forward. Kimberly hesitated, but eventually allowed me to continue. There was a strange tension in the air, a line we both knew we were walking on, but neither of us said anything. "You're doing good," I muttered, encouraging her, though deep down I felt uneasy. I began moving slowly, keeping a steady pace, trying to focus on the moment. Kimberly followed along, not resisting, but something about this didn't sit right with me. It wasn't the usual dynamic, and I could sense her discomfort. We had pushed things far, and it was obvious she felt unsure. I paused for a moment, not saying anything, just letting the silence stretch between us. Kimberly glanced up, her expression a mix of emotions, and I realized we had crossed into unfamiliar territory. This was no longer playful, and I could see her hesitating in ways I hadn't noticed before. "Maybe this is enough," I said quietly, pulling back and letting the tension between us cool down. I knew we had already crossed several boundaries, but there was no point in pushing things further. Kimberly nodded, relieved, as we both took a moment to gather our thoughts. It was clear now that some lines shouldn't be crossed, and even though the temptation was there, I knew we had to be careful moving forward. The situation had reached a point where things were getting out of control. I could feel the intensity building as I pushed forward, letting my actions take over. But then, it struck me just how far things had gone. This wasn't right. The boundaries were blurry now, and I had to pull back. I stopped myself, realizing that this had gone too far. I paused, caught between the rush of the moment and the need to stop. Kimberly's expression, though calm, reminded me that we were stepping into dangerous territory. The tension between us was undeniable, but I knew deep down that this needed to end here. Taking a deep breath, I gently withdrew and let the moment pass. It was clear that there were lines we shouldn't cross, and this was one of them. The days seemed to blur together as time passed and summer approached. There was a strange tension in the air, one that none of us had fully acknowledged but could feel lingering in the background. I found myself reflecting on how things had spiraled, wondering how we'd gotten here. It had all started so innocently, or at least it seemed that way. There were subtle moments, conversations, looks, situations that slowly escalated until boundaries were blurred. Kim had mentioned helping Toby out before, but her tone had shifted over time. She spoke with a mix of curiosity and admiration, especially when it came to Toby's physique. While I wasn't particularly interested in those details, I couldn't help but notice how her excitement grew each time she brought it up. Kim would talk about how she helped him with things, always carefully avoiding anything too direct, but I could sense the change. Her voice would lower when she described her interactions with him, her words tinged with something deeper. I didn't get angry, not exactly. It was confusing, strange, but not enraging. Instead, I just listened, not sure how to feel about it all. As the nights went on, Kim seemed more and more captivated by Toby. She'd tease me with little comments, mentioning how much attention Toby required or how much she had to help him. Her remarks started as casual, but eventually there was something more in them, a fascination with the idea of control, of dominance. And the way she spoke about Toby, especially about his physical presence, hinted at something else. I wasn't sure how much was meant to provoke a reaction from me, or how much of it was simply her thoughts spilling out. Either way, it was clear that Toby had become a subject of intense interest for her. Though part of me felt uneasy, I could tell she was also testing the waters, seeing where things stood between us. But in the end, we had to figure out where to draw the line and decide what was acceptable before things spiraled further. The way Kim described Toby's appearance, his size, his strength, it wasn't just playful teasing anymore. It was more detailed, almost like she was sharing secrets with me, pushing boundaries to see what I would do. The more I listened, the more I realized that these weren't just casual remarks. There was an underlying tension we were both trying to navigate. Over time, things between Kim and I took a strange turn. She became more relaxed and bold in the way she talked about Toby, and I couldn't help but notice. "It's crazy how he talks to me sometimes. You wouldn't believe it," Kim would say, clearly amused. Toby, the quiet guy around me, had apparently been showing a different side to her. One evening, Kim came into the room, kissed me passionately, and when she pulled back, she smiled and asked if I could taste him. "Taste who?" I asked, confused. "Toby," she replied with a mischievous grin. At first I was caught off guard, but her boldness was hard to ignore. I hadn't really thought too much about it. She had done things before, and I guess this wasn't that different. But making me taste it? That was something else. Yet, it didn't stop there. Kim seemed to enjoy pushing those boundaries, and I found myself going along with it. Before long, it almost became part of our routine. When things between her and Toby went further, Kim would come to me afterward and insist on being close, making sure I knew about it. Whether it was in the way she kissed me or during more intimate moments, she always found a way to remind me of what had happened. It was strange at first, and while it felt off, I ended up getting used to it. There was something raw and unfiltered about the whole situation, something I didn't fully understand but couldn't resist. As time went on, it escalated. Kim even started coming to me with Toby's presence still lingering on her. She'd tell me how it made her feel, and while I wasn't thrilled, there was a strange sense of acceptance in all of it. She'd say it was Toby's idea to take things further, and for some reason she kept it going. It left me wondering what I was really okay with, and what was crossing the line. Eventually, I knew we needed a break from it all. The situation had spiraled, and I wasn't sure how much more we could handle. The excitement was overwhelming, and I needed to step back and regain some control. So, we decided to take a weekend trip away from everything. We left Toby at the house, and I gave him a simple warning not to cause trouble while we were gone. He nodded, as he always did, but the image of him and Kim together stuck in my mind. I figured some distance would do us good. Kim seemed unsure at first, but once I framed it as a spontaneous adventure, she was on board. We packed quickly and made our way to the airport, taking the first flight out. "Hey, Nebraska sounds fun, right?" I joked, trying to lighten the mood. "Have you ever been to one of those?" I asked Kim as we took off. Kim laughed at the thought. "I want to see you get thrown off by a big bull," she giggled. "So, what about our trip?" Kim turned to look at me. "Yeah?" I replied, curious. "Italy, is it happening?" she asked. "Well, about that. I was going to wait until everything was set, but why not share now? There's been some big news." "Really?" Kim asked, turning in her seat. Her interest piqued. "Yes, and let's just say our company might be landing a great deal. They'll help us with distribution in Europe, and even with some of our other products. I'm not sure if they'll handle it themselves or work with someone else, but it's a step toward reaching an international market." "What does that mean if the deals go through?" Kim asked, a bit uncertain. "Well, maybe we can go along with our plans. I'll handle the usual stuff, and then I'll fly you over in first class with all the nice treats. We can enjoy Italy and celebrate our anniversary. Maybe pick up some souvenirs or visit a vineyard. Who knows?" "That sounds wonderful," Kim said, her eyes sparkling with excitement. She loved the idea of traveling to Europe and spent a moment daydreaming before focusing back on business. "There are so many chances in Europe. The gaming scene there is huge, especially with everything going on. Lots of merchandise could be sold and plenty of sponsorships," Kim thought aloud. She paused to look out the window. I always let her sit by the window since it helped her feel better during flights. It also gave me a chance to enjoy a drink, too. After a moment, Kim turned back to me. "I've been thinking," she said. "Oh no," I teased. Kim laughed and playfully tapped my shoulder. "So I've been thinking," she continued, "after the business part, maybe I'd like to stop taking the pill. With things going so well, maybe we could think about starting a family?" Her voice softened toward the end. I was a bit surprised, but it made sense. With more steady income and plenty of it, it seemed like a good idea. And what a special way to start a family during a trip to Europe, Italy, France, Greece. We could have quite an adventure. We didn't have many commitments other than our online shop, and I remembered how Kim always talked about wanting kids early. I gently lifted her chin to meet my gaze. "Nothing would make me happier," I said, and her smile widened. "I'm so glad to hear that," Kim said, leaning in for a quick kiss. Then I glanced toward the airplane restroom. "What about a little practice? Want to join a special club?" I asked playfully. Kim looked at me with a knowing smile. "Maybe on the way back. We don't have much time left," she replied. "I can be quick," I said with a grin. As if to signal the end of the conversation, I stood up and offered my hand to Kim. But just as we were heading toward the bathroom, one of the flight attendants, an older woman in her 40s, caught my eye. She carried herself confidently, her red hair standing out against her uniform. She gave us a suspicious look, but there was a small, knowing smile on her face. Without a word, she turned and walked ahead, almost as if she was showing us the way. It felt like she knew what was happening. "I think you've got another fan," Kim whispered behind me. "Really?" I replied, curiosity piqued. "Move," Kim said, giving me a playful shove to keep walking. We quickly followed the flight attendant, who gave us another smirk before turning her back, almost inviting us to proceed. I shook my head with a grin and stepped into the tiny airplane bathroom, Kim squeezing in right behind me. "They really need to make these things bigger," Kim muttered, as we both tried to find space in the cramped quarters. "No kidding," I whispered, trying to keep quiet. Even though the flight attendant seemed to be on our side, we didn't want to push our luck. "So, what's the plan?" I wasn't entirely sure how this would work in such a small space. Airplane bathrooms aren't exactly roomy, and now here we were, both crammed inside. It wasn't going to be easy, but I wasn't about to back down. Kim looked around, clearly trying to figure it out as well, when suddenly we froze. Someone knocked on the door. We exchanged panicked looks. How were we going to explain this? I carefully opened the door just a crack, expecting trouble. But to my surprise, it was the same flight attendant, leaning in with a whisper. "You two need to be quick," she said, her tone low and hurried. I mumbled, caught off guard. "It's a little tight in here," Kim replied, trying to keep it light. The attendant glanced around to make sure no one was watching, then opened the door wider. "There's some space in the back. No one will come by before we land," she whispered, almost impatiently. Was this really happening? Before we could say much else, she stepped aside, practically inviting us to head to the back of the plane. I couldn't believe it. Was she seriously offering us a private spot? It felt surreal, but Kim didn't seem bothered. In fact, she seemed more excited by the whole thing. "Let's go," Kim said, clearly ready for the adventure. At the back of the plane, there was a small, secluded area where the attendants usually sat. It was mostly shielded from view, and while not completely private, it was more hidden than the bathroom. I wasn't entirely sure how comfortable I was with the idea of being partially exposed, but before I could overthink it, the flight attendant gave us an encouraging nod, as if telling us we had her approval. The flight attendant pulled a curtain, giving us some privacy from the rest of the passengers. She turned back to us, her eyes wide with a hint of mischief, and whispered, "What are you two doing?" Kim, with a playful grin, said, "Come on, Josh," and leaned forward. It seemed like both women were in on the fun, encouraging me. I didn't need any more convincing. As I quickly moved, the flight attendant's eyes widened for a moment, and Kim smiled at her with a knowing look. "Impressive, right?" Kim said with a wink. I helped Kim with her jeans, quickly sliding them down, and we both shared a quiet sigh. Everything happened fast, and we tried to keep the noise low since we were on the clock. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed the flight attendant step closer, her presence almost surprising. I could even smell her perfume as she stood near us, watching intently. Kim didn't realize she was there until the attendant reached out and lightly touched her, almost as if inspecting the situation. Kim's reaction was immediate, her body tensing slightly, caught up in the unexpected moment. "You almost done?" the flight attendant asked calmly, more as a question than a rush. "Yeah," I replied. "Good," she said, her tone steady. Then she slowed things down, taking control for a moment, which caught both Kim and me off guard. Kim looked back, confused for a second as the attendant gently pulled me away, ending things before we could finish on our own. "Whoa," we both murmured, surprised by how quickly everything had shifted. With a smooth motion, the attendant helped bring the moment to a close, all while maintaining her calm demeanor. She stepped back, signaling that time was up. But it was clear she had enjoyed watching us in that brief moment. "Back to your seats now," she said, glancing at us with a smile, her eyes giving a final knowing look before she moved away. As we returned to our seats, I couldn't help but ask Kim, "You okay with what just happened?" Kim grinned, clearly amused. "Of course," she replied. "That was something else, wasn't it?" When we got back from Nebraska, we settled into our normal routine. The trip had been fun. Who knew the rodeo could be so exciting? I even managed to stay on the mechanical bull without falling off, though they wouldn't let me try the real thing. It was probably for the best. Those huge animals looked like they'd be impossible to handle. We enjoyed some good barbecue, and overall it was a weekend well spent. When we returned home, I found an email waiting for me from Italy. It wasn't a confirmation of the deal with Entrendi, but it was a positive step. They had finally given me a date for the trip, the end of June. I'd be flying over to go through everything: in-person product discussions, business strategies, and distribution plans. We had covered most of this already, but there's always something different about doing business face-to-face. With that trip coming up, it also brought up two big things we'd been talking about for a while: starting a family and finding a new place for Toby. I had tried being friendly to him, teaching him things like how to tie a tie, but lately, it had been clear he was crossing lines with Kim. I wasn't angry, but I knew things could get out of hand if we didn't put a stop to it soon. "So, you two need to slow things down a bit," I joked with Kim as we played a casual game of 21 in the driveway. We had a basketball hoop next to the garage and would often mess around just shooting hoops without any real rules. "What do you mean?" Kim asked, sounding a little nervous. Maybe she was thinking about everything we'd been talking about having kids, moving forward with our plans, or maybe something else. "If we're going to start a family, things need to calm down," I said, dribbling the ball. It felt like it needed a bit more air. "I'm not doing anything with him, and I won't," Kim responded, a little defensively, wiping the sweat from her forehead. She was wearing those tight lycra shorts and a white shirt, with a red bra peeking through underneath. Then she gave me a playful look, her lips curling into a small smile. "Unless you're okay with it," she added, squinting at me as the sun shone in her eyes. For a moment, my heart skipped a beat, but I quickly pulled myself together. I tossed the ball back to her, giving myself a moment to think while she dribbled and took another shot. Probably not," I said, watching as she shot again. "What about you?" I asked, tossing the ball back to her. "I don't know," Kim said, shrugging. "I can't say I'm not curious, but I think that would be crossing a line. Plus, I'm worried Toby might get the wrong idea. I mean, I think he actually has a bit of a crush. I don't. I love you. It's fun to mess around, but I don't want to hurt his feelings or anything," she added with a playful grin. "We're all young and a little wild sometimes, right?" I laughed, throwing the ball in a smooth arc, landing perfectly in the basket. "Just kidding. I'd make sure nothing goes too far," Kim joked, lightening the mood. Later that night, while Kim went off to spend time with Toby like she had been lately, I stayed back in the bedroom, waiting for her to come back. Usually I'd just wait for her to return, but tonight felt different. I was restless, and I couldn't quite put my finger on why. Maybe it was the way Toby had been acting lately. There was something about his attitude that didn't sit right with me. It wasn't a big thing, just a slight feeling that made me a little uneasy. I had set up this whole situation with Kim and Toby, so I couldn't really blame anyone but myself. But still, there was something about the way Toby seemed to push boundaries that got under my skin. I knew Kim was in control, and I trusted her completely. But coming back from our trip and seeing how quickly she went to him, it bothered me more than I wanted to admit. I didn't say anything because I knew Kim would stop if I asked her to, but I didn't want to make her feel like I was holding her back. It had been about 10 minutes since Kim went downstairs. Normally, she'd be back in 20 to 30 minutes, so there was still time. But instead of waiting, I found myself getting out of bed and heading down the stairs. Once in the hallway, I listened closely and heard faint, rhythmic sounds coming from the TV room. I froze for a second. Were they really in there? And what were those sounds? Was it just Toby, or was something else going on? Before I could stop myself, I crept closer to the door. The quiet, wet noises became clearer as I approached. I peeked inside and saw Toby sitting on the chaise lounge, his back to me. His head and shoulders were hunched forward, and I could barely make out Kim's dark hair in his lap, moving slowly. I stepped further into the shadows, watching from the dimly lit corner, trying to understand what I was seeing. Toby was sitting in the middle of the chaise lounge, his legs spread out, with my wife kneeling in front of him. Her lips were wrapped around him, and one hand was gripping the base of his body while the other hand was out of sight, likely lost in her own world. At first, my reaction was what you'd expect. I was shocked, surprised, maybe even a little angry. The woman I had been with for so long, my high school sweetheart, was in our living room with someone younger, someone who had always seemed far beneath her. Toby wasn't the type of guy who took care of himself, just a renter in our annex. Yet here was my wife, someone I held in such high regard, doing this. Oddly, though, I didn't feel jealous in the traditional sense. Instead, I was fascinated. I couldn't help but be mesmerized by the sight. Seeing Kim, my partner in life and business, in this intimate act, stirred something unexpected in me. She seemed so focused, completely involved, and even enjoying herself in ways I hadn't seen. The way she flicked her tongue, how she seemed caught up in the moment, it was surreal. A part of me wanted to rush in and stop everything. Maybe I should have. After all, this wasn't part of the deal. We had agreed on boundaries. This had clearly crossed the line. I knew Kim wasn't the one to push those boundaries on her own. So why hadn't she stopped? Maybe she was worried I'd be upset, or perhaps she didn't want the fun to end. I decided not to interrupt. I backed out quietly, deciding to talk to Kim about it later. I wanted to hear her side of the story, to understand what had happened. When she returned to our room about 15 minutes later, I tried to act calm. Just got back from helping Toby? I asked casually. Yeah, she replied with a little smile. He finished in my mouth, but I swallowed. I wasn't expecting her to be so open, but I pushed for more. Anything else you want to tell me? Kim paused for a moment, like she was thinking it over, before she smirked slightly. I went a little further tonight. I did more than usual. I was caught off guard by her directness. I cleaned him up and then, well, I did more. It just happened, she added, as if waiting for me to respond. Her tone wasn't defensive, more like she was daring me to react. Kim stood in front of me, her voice wavering but still steady as she began explaining. We've done it in so many places. While you were up here waiting, the kitchen by the pool. Sometimes during the day, too. She paused, glancing down. Is that too much? Have I messed up? I could see she was struggling with guilt, not because of what she did, but because she wanted my forgiveness, and more importantly, my understanding. Kim wasn't one to cry, but her voice carried the weight of her regret. Even though I felt a sense of betrayal, I couldn't stay angry. I knew this recent wild side of hers wasn't out of malice, it was a mix of curiosity and excitement. Still, I needed answers. How did this start? We agreed on boundaries, and now? All of this? Have you crossed the line further? Have you two? I didn't finish my sentence, letting it hang in the air. Kim quickly shook her head. No, it's just, I help him and he helps me. We haven't gone that far. I wouldn't do that. Honestly, I'm not even sure I want to. I mean, yeah, it's tempting sometimes, but only because of, he's different in certain ways. She looked away, almost embarrassed. I raised an eyebrow, teasing her gently to ease the tension. Different how? Kim hesitated, then let out a small chuckle. Well, he's bigger, but that's all. It's not about anything deeper. He's still so different from you. He's just a boy compared to what we have. I smirked, sensing that familiar brashness that I had always loved about her. It was clear she wasn't hiding the truth from me. She just needed to explain it her way. Big what? I teased again, keeping things light so she knew I wasn't furious. Big. Well, Kim said, her playful tone returning for a moment. But no, I'm not going to sleep with him. I don't think I even want to. I won't lie, there's curiosity, but that's it. What excites me has more to do with the novelty of it. I mean, it's there, and hard to ignore. I sighed, relieved at least by her honesty. That's good to hear. But how did this start? You can tell me. Kim looked down for a moment, gathering her thoughts. I was helping him, like we agreed, But one day, while I was doing that, I think I was trying to say something, and he just kind of pushed. And before I knew it, things escalated. It was one of those times during the sleepover, actually. My eyes widened. Wait, that long ago? And you've been doing this since then? I asked, trying to wrap my head around it. She nodded, looking a bit sheepish. Yeah, I guess I let things slip further without meaning to. It was a strange feeling, realizing that my wife had been hiding things from me for weeks. Do you want me to stop? Kim asked, her voice serious. I'll stop right now if you say so. I took a moment before answering. I don't know. Maybe we can keep things as they are, but we need to set clear boundaries. No more pushing the limits unless we've talked about it and agreed. I want to know what's going on, but I also want you to feel comfortable. And let's make sure that by the time we get back from Italy, he's out. Kim didn't hesitate. Agreed. Nothing more than what we've done, and we'll give him his notice when we finalize the deal. We sat quietly for a while, the weight of the conversation sinking in. After a few minutes, Kim broke the silence. Josh? She asked, a small smirk playing on her lips. Yeah? You want to get back at him? She said, her grin widening. All the stuff he's been doing, trying to act like he's got the upper hand. I've got an idea to show him who's really in charge. Curious, I asked, what's the plan? Later that night, the engine of my car echoed as I pulled into the garage. Kim and I had just finished celebrating. After sorting out my upcoming trip to Italy, we had gone to a fancy barbecue place one Kim had invested in and had a great night out. But now we were back home, and something felt different. I grabbed a beer from the fridge, waiting for Kim to come out of the bathroom. She was taking her time, clearly preparing herself. We had done stuff like this before, but tonight was going to be different. We were making a statement. What happened next completely caught me off guard. Kim had left out a big part of her plan. When she walked out from the hallway, it wasn't the casual, nerdy Kim I was used to. Instead, she was transformed. She moved confidently, dressed in black lace and high heels. Every detail of her outfit was meticulously chosen. The way the lingerie framed her figure, how her legs looked even longer in stockings, and how the fabric showed just enough to leave some mystery. It was mesmerizing. "The way you're looking at me," Kim said softly, a teasing smile on her lips. "I won't have any trouble making sure you know who's in charge tonight." Before I could even respond, I was at her side. Everything about her radiated confidence, and the way she carried herself tonight felt different, more powerful. I lifted her up easily, setting her on the kitchen island, ready to embrace whatever came next. I held Kim close, lifting her effortlessly as I moved her to the open space between the lounge and the kitchen, where the moonlight filtered in softly. There was more room here, and I could feel the strength and energy flowing through me, enough to carry her without effort. We locked eyes, and with a gentle nod from her, I started moving us in sync, guiding her with a firm grip. She wrapped her arms around my neck, leaning against me as I held her securely. There was no rush, just the quiet connection between us, the familiar rhythm that came from years of knowing each other so well. Kim's breath quickened, her hands resting on my shoulders as we moved together. The room felt still, filled only with the sound of our breathing. She whispered my name softly, her voice full of affection and trust. I smiled, focusing on her face, watching the way her eyes lit up with the moment. We weren't putting on a show for anyone. This was just us, sharing something real. Kim's laughter broke the quiet as she leaned in, her cheek brushing against mine. "Looks like we've got this figured out," she teased, her voice light and happy. I laughed too, feeling the warmth of the moment. "Yeah, I'd say we've got it." We moved gently, the world outside our home fading into the background. Everything felt simple, peaceful, and right. As we slowed down, Kim rested her head on my shoulder, her arms still wrapped around me. I knew that no matter what plans we had made or what had happened before, moments like these were what mattered most. As Kim got off the sofa, the atmosphere shifted. She seemed calmer now, and as I watched her move towards Toby, I couldn't help but feel a mixture of emotions. She had pushed Toby away earlier, showing me that she knew where to draw the line, and I appreciated that. But still, this whole situation was strange. What's going on here? I thought, watching the two of them. Toby sat there, silent now, not as confident as before. Kim knelt in front of him, but it wasn't the same energy as before. There was no tension, no real connection, just an awkward silence. It felt like the thrill that had carried us through the night was fading. Kim looked over at me, her expression soft, almost questioning. I could tell she was wondering if I was okay with everything that was happening. "Are you all right?" she asked, her voice gentle. I nodded. I didn't feel the need to stop things, but I was grateful that Kim respected the boundaries we'd set earlier. This had been more about pushing limits and exploring something new, but at the end of the day, she was still my wife, and I trusted her. Toby, on the other hand, seemed less sure now. Maybe he thought things would go differently. Maybe he thought he'd be in control, but that wasn't the case. Kim had made it clear where the boundaries were, and we were all staying within them. I stood up, took a deep breath, and moved towards the door. "I'm heading to bed," I said, glancing at Kim. "We'll talk later." She smiled, standing up as well. "All right, I'll be there in a minute." As I left the room, I felt a sense of relief. We had tested the waters, but now it was time to return to normal. There was no need to let things go any further. Now I found myself watching Kim and Toby again, but this time it felt different. It was like everything slowed down, and I was aware of every detail. Kim looked up at Toby as if checking for some kind of signal, and then she started moving closer to him. She gently kissed along his skin, seeming to enjoy the moment, and everything about the scene felt surreal. Kim moved with care as though she was taking her time, making sure every movement had meaning. She ran her hands along his arms, and I could see Toby's reaction as he leaned back, clearly enjoying the attention. It was obvious that Kim was putting in extra effort, maybe because I was sitting there watching. "That's good," Toby said, closing his eyes. Kim smiled at that, then shifted her focus, still slow and careful, as if savoring every second. She kept things light, teasing in a way that made the room feel full of tension, like something big was about to happen. Toby's reaction was instant, but instead of rushing, he let her continue. There was something different about the way they interacted. It was like they both knew this wasn't just about them anymore. "Just like that," Toby murmured. "Don't stop now." Kim kept up her slow and deliberate pace, never rushing. It was clear they were both enjoying the moment, and I was just an observer, unsure of how to feel about everything unfolding in front of me. As I watched them, it became clear that this was more about control and trust. Kim was exploring a dynamic between the three of us that I hadn't expected. There was no rush, no pressure, just an unspoken understanding between us all. Kim was focused, giving all her attention to Toby, but instead of the power dynamic I thought would play out, it felt like things had shifted. What was supposed to be a way to show control had turned into something else entirely, and it left me feeling conflicted. Toby seemed to realize the power he held in that moment. The way Kim was looking at him, it was clear she was drawn into the moment. He seemed to be relishing it, but I knew he wouldn't take things too far, not with me here. Still, there was an underlying tension in the room, a feeling that this had gone beyond just playing along. Toby's attitude had changed over time. Once he looked up to me as an older brother figure, but now we were more like rivals, even though neither of us had said it outright. It was obvious we both knew it. And now he was pushing boundaries, trying to see how far he could go with Kim while I was watching. I knew I was going to be away in Italy for a while, and leaving them alone made me uneasy. Did I trust her enough? Did she trust me? It felt like things were starting to slip out of my control. Toby seemed determined to test the limits, and the lines were getting blurry. Toby gently moved Kim into a new position on the sofa, guiding her so she was sitting up, facing him. There was something unsettling about how comfortable he seemed, like he knew exactly what he was doing. He stood over her, giving her instructions, and she followed without hesitation. It was clear they had become used to this routine. I watched from the side, feeling the weight of the situation. Toby's presence was hard to ignore, and I knew he was testing his boundaries, seeing how far he could push things. This wasn't just about a power move anymore. It was about something deeper, something that had grown over time. I heard myself make a sound, a small groan, as the realization hit me. This wasn't what I had expected, and I couldn't help but feel like everything had shifted. For she might pretend to hesitate, but I knew I was almost there. Kim murmured as I continued, noticing her reactions. She was familiar with this by now, and I felt comfortable being assertive, but Kimberly's earlier hesitation had already affected me greatly. Her soft hums didn't make things easier. I felt overwhelmed and couldn't hold back any longer, pulling back slightly before continuing, feeling the intensity of the moment. "You enjoy this, don't you?" I asked her, noticing her expression. Then I whispered, "Why don't you give your husband a nice kiss?" At first I thought she might refuse, but she gave me a sly smile, and as I stepped back, she went over to Josh. I didn't expect him to be so passive, but Kimberly leaned in and kissed him deeply. I couldn't help but think about how strange it was for him to accept this situation. Oh well, at least it wasn't me. I couldn't believe how bold it was kissing Kim right in front of Toby. Being alone was one thing, but now he was watching. I didn't know why, but it made things more intense. Kim was so eager. It was unstoppable. Kim then pulled away from the kiss. I thought she needed a moment, but her lips didn't return. She closed her eyes, furrowed her brow, and let out a shaky sigh right in front of me. I shifted slightly and realized Toby was behind Kim. The sounds and her reactions filled the room. I should have been upset, but somehow it only intensified my feelings. Toby was guiding Kim away from me, interrupting the moment. He helped her onto the sofa. Before she could get comfortable, Toby lifted her legs over his shoulders, clearly lost in the moment. I hadn't thought of doing that, but the look in Toby's eyes showed he was following his instincts. "That's it," Toby murmured as he leaned forward, his face hidden from view. That. "That's one way to do it," Kim exclaimed. In that moment, Kim and Toby shared an intense connection. I couldn't see exactly what was happening, but their reactions spoke volumes. Kim's voice grew louder and she seemed overwhelmed. Then she reached a peak of emotion, reacting strongly to Toby. I saw her face filled with powerful feelings. She gripped a pillow tightly, trying to move closer to him despite the awkward position. Finally, Toby helped Kim lie down on the sofa to make her more comfortable. Kim seemed dazed and didn't fully grasp what was happening. But I did. I was fully aware, yet I froze. Toby moved closer to Kim, appearing a bit out of control. I knew she wasn't fully aware to stop him if he went too far. He hesitated, but then continued. I began to understand what Kim meant earlier. Watching them was both fascinating and unsettling, like the suspense before a shocking moment in a movie. We both sensed something was about to happen, but didn't know how it would unfold. I looked at Kim. She seemed alert again, but was also frozen, wondering what would come next. As Toby moved, his actions became more intense. I noticed he was pushing boundaries. From his movements, I could tell he was hesitating, not going too far. I knew Kim would stop him if he crossed the line. Each time he moved, it seemed like he was getting closer to overstepping. But from her reactions, I could tell his actions were affecting her. Toby was so close, and nothing stood between him and taking the next step. I saw it on Kim's face. Each movement sent a wave of emotion through her. She whispered something as Toby continued, clearly feeling the impact. He repeated the motion, adjusting his movements to have a stronger effect. Then, instead of moving upward, Toby shifted forward. It was hard to tell from my angle, but it seemed like he had crossed a line. Maybe he thought I wouldn't notice. But Kim's expression revealed everything. "Okay, that's enough. No more," Kim finally managed to say. I was truly amazed by her strength at that moment. If I were in her position, I don't think I could have done the same. It felt like watching the most thrilling movie, seeing the tension build. But Kim's dedication to being a faithful wife was stronger than any temptation. Toby hesitated but tried to continue. "But your husband wants me to," he said. Kim looked into my eyes. She knew how I felt. Teasing is one thing, but going further? I could see the conflict in her eyes. She was close to giving in. Perhaps she sensed that the point of no return was near. So Kim quickly sat up and turned toward Toby. He took the opportunity to gently push her back onto the couch, attempting to proceed before she could respond. Just as she was about to protest, she reacted sharply to his advance. Suddenly, I found myself intervening. One moment Toby was near Kim, the next he was on the floor behind the sofa. I had moved him away from my wife without even thinking about it. The brief display of strength seemed to unsettle him. I offered a hand to help Kim up from the couch. Then I turned to Toby as he rubbed his elbow. "She said no, friend," I said, giving him a wink. He looked humiliated. Perhaps he thought everything was going according to his plan. I began to realize that Toby would never accept that he couldn't be with Kim, especially now, if we were going to ask him to leave. Maybe he was afraid that Kim and I were stronger together than he thought. Honestly, Kim and I were a team, and he had tried to disrupt that. Good thing he would be leaving soon. I had planned everything carefully. I knew once we were alone, Kim and I could move forward. As we were about to walk past him, Kim spoke up. "We can't leave him like this. Would you mind if I help him?" Kim asked me. "Even now?" I replied, but I wasn't angry. Not at all, actually. Toby seemed to be in discomfort from the fall, so he didn't catch everything we said, but I agreed. He accepted Kim's offer of assistance right there on the floor. It was a pity gesture, you might say. Thanks for watching this video. Don't forget to subscribe to Infidelity Plus to stay updated with more captivating tales of infidelity and payback. Turn on notifications so you're the first to see our latest content.